There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson, and today I'm speaking with public land guru KC Smith. All right, folks, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, which is brought to you by First Light. You might notice that this is not the voice of Mark Kenyon. He sent me a text last week and said that he picked up a new hobby called duck herding. When I asked him what that was, he said, it's all in the name, and that he had to go pick up his new flock. So I don't know anymore, guys. Anyway, today I'm speaking with KC Smith from The Element. Casey is from Texas, but every year he heads out with his partner in crime, Tyler Jones, to hunt a bunch of different states, all on public land. Both guys have been on an absolute tear in recent seasons, which is really cool to see. Throughout this show, Casey and I talk about why he chooses to research certain states, what he really factors in before deciding to buy a non-resident whitetail tag in one state but not another. This episode is full of good advice if you're interested in taking your hunting on the road, and is really kind of like a part one. Next week, I'm sitting down with Andy May to dive deeper into this hunt planning topic. So we really kind of have a back-to-back breakdown of this issue for 2 weeks in a row. Really cool episodes. Casey, how you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. Just had a long night with the toddler and ready to rock and roll. You know how this goes, like it doesn't matter how much you sleep, that's whatever. It's actually kind of keeps you in the hunting season mindset all the time, even when you're not on a trip,
Wait, how does it do that?
Well, just lack of sleep and pure exhaustion all the time, instead of being cyclical where you get to come home and rest, you might as well just spend all fall super tired.
How old's the little guy now?
Don't ask me months. He's pushing on 2. He turns 2 in March. So yeah, he's getting on up there where we've reached that new stage where he whines a lot more than he used to because he understands like his way, So, but that's the human condition. We all want it our way.
Yeah, definitely, man. How has that changed? How has having a little one changed your travel schedule or how you think about being on the road? Because you and Tyler travel a lot for The Element, and I know what it's like to go hunt 4, 5, 6 states a year and have little kids at home. It makes things different, man.
Oh, absolutely, man. It's honestly, the change is emotional more than anything. I have a really understanding wife. Of course, we talk things out, and she has a good job, so I'm able to go and be a bum, and I definitely, make my contributions income-wise as well, but and a great family dynamic where I always have plenty of people to be babysitters and to hang out with him and stuff. But honestly, the missing the kid is the hardest part for me. It really is, and it's so strange because my wife isn't going to listen to this, so I can say whatever I want, right? But I miss her, but in such a different way. Like we spent a lot of time in our life in a long distance relationship, so I can love her from afar and be just fine. But it's like, how fast they grow. It's like if you're gone for 5 days, you come back and it's slightly a different child.
Yep.
And you're like, man, all this stuff I missed. So I think that's the thing that's the toughest part for me. Like, I just don't want to string together a bunch of, like, the month of November, I want to be gone a week or 9 days and come home for, at least 3 or 4 days instead of just being a full on just travel guy. And that's not realistic for anybody, right?
Yeah.
You know, like just being gone for a month. It's just tough, man. So that's what changed for me.
I had a conversation with Tom Miranda about this way back when my girls were born. And, you know, I kind of said the same thing. Like, man, I feel guilty traveling to do this. And, you know, he was like, man, I've had so many people say stuff like that to me over the years, you know, and nobody's traveled to hunt more than that guy. I mean, he's been all over the world for 35 years, you know, and he said, he kind of framed it. He said, you know, if you were a businessman and you were traveling for meetings or whatever, nobody would bat an eye. They would just be like, that's an acceptable thing to do for your career. But when people look at it and like, oh, you're just off hunting, they're like, you're just being selfish. And, you know, it sort of feels that way when your kids are little, because, you know, you do enjoy parts of it. It's not like you're just flying out doing a bunch of meetings and trying to sell, you know, vacuums or whatever the hell you could be doing. But it changes the game a lot. And I know for me with, you know, when we had the girls, I was in heavy travel stage. Like that was when I was really trying to string together, you know, 2 or 3 good bucks on public land every year and really make it happen. And it was a weird motivator for me. Like, get this done. Like, don't waste your time. Like, this is not lay around in your tent in the middle of the day. Like, make it happen and go home. And I remember just this one time I was in South Dakota, probably in, I think it was like 2015. And I was struggling and it was Halloween. And I had this plan. I was like, I'm going to go sit this pond. It was pretty warm. I'm like, I just want to get this done and get home because I'm doing the math. I'm like, if I shoot a buck this morning and get him out, I can make it home in time to take the girls trick-or-treating. And I just happened to, you know, 9-10 in the morning, had 2 bucks come in chasing a doe, and I thumped one, packed him out, made the drive home. And as I pulled into the driveway, I could hear my girls knocking on the neighbor's door. And it made me so happy because I'm like, I got it done. Like, I killed the buck. I drove the 6.5 hours home, and now I get to go walk around with them. And it's just it's weird. It's weird how it changes your perspective on this travel game.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So just last week I was in Oklahoma, and I honestly caught myself making some like quick decisions that I wouldn't make otherwise, trying to kill a deer. And I kind of have this way of approaching whitetail hunting where I try to be knowledgeably aggressive is what I say. Tyler and I talk about it a lot, where you make the most aggressive move you can get away with and it still be a smart move. And I breached that ceiling a couple times where I did things that were kind of dumb, but it was kind of like a Hail Mary type thing. Like, this might work, you know? And retrospectively, if I'd have played it safer, might have actually came out with a better outcome where I did kill a deer sooner, as opposed to trying to make it happen in the next 2 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. A lot of this stuff, I think when you talk to people who really, really get it done in a bunch of different states and, you know, have a pretty good track record of, you know, filled tags in wildly different environments, you get this sense of sort of this equilibrium between that super cavalier, you know, go get it done versus, okay, I got to let this breathe and let this situation bring the deer to me. And you just kind of get this feel of like that gut instinct. Like, okay, sometimes it is that you look at it and go, look, I know I could blow this deer out, but I could also crawl up to the edge of this draw and shoot him, you know, instead of being paralyzed, you know, or I could go move right in there, but I got faith in this little pinch point. And so I'm going to let them play around over there for a little bit because somebody's going to make it my way. And, you know, that comes from a lot of experience traveling, but you hear that kind of vibe come from a lot of people who, at least a lot of people who I really respect as whitetail hunters.
Yeah, it's a weird deal. And you have to kind of judge the environment too, you know, especially you start looking at like that. I'm thinking of specific deer. We were crawling around in some pretty monotonous habitat of just kind of that, I don't know, river bottom-esque type stuff where it's just a bunch of elms and hackberries and cedars, you know, just, and so there's not a great pinch point. There's not a great food source either. And so you put eyes on a deer, you glass a deer up at 110 yards and you're like, oh, also the wind's blowing like 35 is the day that front rolled in. And you've probably seen this, but a lot of times when in those super windy days, those deer will be on their feet, but they'll just stand stationary for an hour or two, and that was kind of my thought in that specific scenario. I was like, okay, there's no way for me to really set up on this deer and feel good about him walking by. So I might as well go for it. And got to 40 yards, just didn't have the shot. And then he ended up, doing stuff with the camera's a lot different than not, and I had a camera guy with me. Eric is great. He's filmed us do a ton of stuff this year and he's awesome at it. But just in general, two big fat humans walking is a lot louder than one. So, who knows what happened, but, blew him out. And, but at the same time, learned some stuff from it, and I think that's anytime you mess up and don't learn, it sounds so cliche. And I hate to talk in cliches, man. I really do. But if you mess up, you got to learn. Because if you mess up and don't learn, it's complete waste, And from that, went in the next morning and had an opportunity on 2 more bucks because we learned some stuff there. So,
well, your point about high winds, frontal conditions, and watching those deer, I think one of the reasons that it's so fun to go hunt, maybe Kansas or some parts of Nebraska, the Dakotas, is because you get to watch actual deer behavior, like mature buck behavior sometimes in those conditions. And if you pick most of the whitetails range, you don't watch that stuff. I mean, when you think about all the people, I shouldn't say all the people, you think about the Dan Infalt type of guys who are talking buck bedding a ton. Like they're piecing together deer behavior by looking at sign and then, hunting and seeing what happens. But a lot of it is like, I got to fill in the blanks because you don't watch those deer bed in the swamps a lot of time, right? Like when you're in timber, but when you get out to some of those plain states, you can actually see, you can sit there and get the spotter on them or your binos on them and go, I know what that buck does in these conditions, or at least I know what he did. That stuff's so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. We actually just recorded a podcast yesterday talking about this stuff. We kind of did like the, what we learned through hunting the rut this year and that sort of thing. And we were in Kansas. I was in Kansas 9 days. Tyler's in Kansas 11 days sequentially, right? So we got to see from November 1st to November 11th how things ramped up and got to observe bucks interacting with those at long and short range. So it's exactly what you're saying where, man, I've gotten to the point where I really enjoy hunting the more open stuff because of that, because you just get to observe deer. And don't get me wrong, next year I plan on being in Iowa about November 5th, but I'm going to hunt it hard. But it's just so much, I hate to say an easy word, but better to be able to look at him and see him. I stalked a buck for, 4 or 5 days before I shot my deer that was on public, pushing those real high numbers. I'm not going to throw too much out there, but he was big, the biggest deer I've ever been on. And I was on him hard, had him at 20 yards one day. And I got to see him go from, hey, I don't like your decoy, I'm leaving my does here, to I'm going to try to kill this other buck that's within 100 yards of my does, and it's neat to see it ramp up that way and see their changes. And one of the things I realized is that this rut activity window that we all like to hunt, where the bucks are, you can snort wheeze them in from 100 or whatever. That's a lot smaller, at least in my observations. I'm mid 30s, right? So I haven't hunted a whole lifetime, but I've hunted a lot. And the time period that you have on a specific deer that he's just going insane and ready to just whoop the world is pretty small, and that's something I really realized. And so it kind of changed my perspective on how I hunt deer in the rut, at least for the moment, because I really like that aggressive stuff. I like calling, rattling, doing all that stuff. I'm Texan, like it's just kind of a way we are, but the concept of those deer, like that buck was the master of the plains. Okay. Like he was the guy, had a harem of 6 to 9 does every day. And on November 2nd, we showed him a 2-dimensional decoy at 80 yards and he decided that he wanted to leave as opposed to fight. and just leave those does with us. And you think about that and you're like, man, I would have thought that guy was just, he was just a brawler, just because he's so big and old. And it wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Man, it's kind of,
I think I totally agree with you that the windows are a lot tighter than we think. And I also, but I also think there's more of them than we think. And a lot of them happen in October. And I know, I've snort wheezed in bucks and killed them in October when you're not supposed to be able to. Not only bucks that shouldn't probably be responding to that because they're not the king, right? And also a time period. But you know how it is when you see, I don't know, you watch these deer and you can see their body language and go, this is probably going to work or not. And, sometimes when you're sitting there and they're going point A to B, they're not messing around. They've got a destination in mind. That deer a lot of times is like uncallable. You'll get his attention, but getting him fired up and turned around, different story. But if you get that buck that's kind of meandering and he's, nipping some buds here and there, and he's kind of looking around and he's just like, he's waiting for some action. Like they just look like there's something going on, and it's pretty subtle a lot of times, but man, there's a big difference on calling to those two kinds of deer.
Oh, absolutely, man. You've seen this, and it's like we're in a plain state. I see a deer at 100 yards. It's November 2nd or whatever. And you're like hitting him with a grunt and he's acting like he doesn't even hear it. And, the wind's 8 to 12, it's like, I know he can hear this thing and he just doesn't care because he is focused on whatever he's got going on. And I think that, I used to think this was kind of, I don't want to be rude, right? But I used to not really believe that much in the whole, juries and their 13 phases or whatever. And I don't know for sure how that all plays out biologically, but I am truly convinced that it's not as much by calendar, but it's per animal, that there is much more than pre-rut, rut, and post-rut. There's so much more than that going on. And I think that I wouldn't have those revelations if it wasn't for hunting in places where you can't observe deer.
Yep. Yeah. And you can get a little bit of a glimpse on trail cameras, but it's like, not even.
Oh man,
not even close.
Yes, but we run trail cameras quite a bit, especially for guys who end up not hunting anywhere near our trail cameras a lot. Because we like to have that observation. And I have a little property here in East Texas that I run a camera on a lot over food, and I was thinking that I was just having a terrible year because we've been on the road quite a bit, and not seeing hardly anything on camera. Got quite a few pigs, and just dealing with that. And then I decide after we get back from Kansas one day, I'm like, I'm going to go hunt it. Why not? I can hunt before my wife leaves for work. And see like 2 mature bucks, but they just weren't on camera. And then proceed to have the best 5 to 6 days worth of hunting I've had in East Texas in a long time because I didn't pay just attention to the camera, but the cameras were showing does, right? And like if you got does, you're going to have a buck sooner or later, and that's what I saw, past some pretty good deer here in East Texas, which is something I've never really got to do.
Let's talk. You mentioned a little bit ago that you're going to draw Iowa next year.
Yeah.
Or, this season, I should say. What's the planning process? Because I know Tyler was texting me. Does he have the same points as you?
No, we're kind of on opposite points schedule. So he drew in 19. And we always kind of swing for the fences for Iowa. Want to hunt, which I don't know if there's a bad unit, but we try to hunt the really good stuff that we know a little bit better and it's a little bit more obtainable. But anyways, we're on opposite schedules. So he hunted in 19. I'll hunt in 22, and then he'll probably hunt 23 or 24, something like that. Yeah.
Depending on where the points, depending on what it takes to draw.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something. because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
So you guys live in Texas. You hunt public land all over, kind of the western fringe of where a lot of people go, but you also get into the Midwest, obviously. What's the planning process for you? Like, how do you sit there this time of year in the winter and go, okay, I want to hit, if you're going to draw Iowa, that's going to take precedence, right? But you're not only going to Iowa. So how do you figure out, like, man, this is a state I really want to try. This is an area of a state I really want to try. How do you go about that?
So I don't think about trophy potential too much, except for top tier stuff, right? So Iowa, of course, is awesome. And that's where world-class bucks are, but I don't really think about going to Iowa and killing a 200. If one walks by, that'd be great. But realistically, I want to go up there and have a good hunt and kill, a really respectable deer on public. That's what I'm going to do. And not solely because I think public land is cool, but I also just not the guy with the finances to pay for an outfitted hunt. If I had that, I might do that because I'd really like to kill a really big deer sometime too, but I like to be realistic with my expectations, probably is the first thing, right? And think about what can you actually get out of a hunt and how can you be the most efficient? I guess, on a more broader spectrum, I think about population densities and how that plays into the amount of public land. You have states that have pretty low population densities, but if they have a decent amount of public access, you can end up finding pockets of deer that you feel like you're, I don't know, in, central Illinois on a green field. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's population densities are a little weird sometimes because they don't account for the micro habitat pockets. You know what I mean? So that's stuff I look for. And of course, all this relates back to map scouting. And I'm trying to be more bullet pointed, but that's not how my brain works. I hop around 100 million places. So, sorry, but that, I think about how population densities relate to what the habitat looks like on a map. And if I look at a state and I see, like, say, for instance, I want to hunt Illinois next year. You look at Northern Illinois, pretty good population density, but there's a ton of agriculture and there's not a lot of timber up there. And you think about, okay, if I go up there after the crops are out, like there's going to be a lot of deer in these little pockets. And that's kind of exponential because it's kind of the best of both worlds. So I think about that stuff a lot. Don't pay too much attention to trophy potential. We all pretty much know that, Pope and Young type deer can be killed about near anywhere. So think about that. Think about the availability of tags. I like to hunt over-the-counter states, really do, because you just know you can go, and I would rather spend my time scouting, map scouting, boot scouting, whatever you want to call it, on over-the-counter states and figuring something good out than spending a ton of time thinking about points and how to draw and all this stuff. It's just, I don't really crave that too much.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. I do play the points game in Iowa, and I play it out west in a few states just because I know I'm going to have, maybe one or two really cool elk hunts in my life, or, a mule deer hunt or something. So but I'm the same way. I love a state that will just sell me a tag because I know I can do a bunch of research and I can go there this year.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing, man. I live my life a little bit scatterbrained, and I am not the most organized person either. So points don't go well with that. It's like, wait, did I buy my point this year? I don't remember. Some states, if you miss 2 years, they penalize you. You lose them. Like that make you want to cry. Yep. You know what I mean? And so like, it doesn't play well for me. I much rather just concentrate on the season at hand, pretty much, kind of like what you're saying. It feels good to know. And the other thing is too, like, some of these places have public access that's rotating. It might be in this year and out next year, and yada yada. Crops change, and this and that. It's the MRI stuff. Most recent information is what you got to work with, and I like and I do like to go say, I know I'm going to draw this state, or I know I'm going to go hunt this state this year. Let's go spend some time in the summer, or in the early spring, and put some boots on the ground there, and then hunt it this fall. I think that same year scouting is super valuable.
Yep. Oh, me too. You said something about Iowa that I think we should dive into a little bit, because when you talk about habitat and population densities, this is something that drives me absolutely nuts. I hear people, like, I see it on hunting forums, and somebody will be like, "Hey, I'm thinking about going to Nebraska this year. Anybody have just general recommendations? I don't want your spots." Yeah. It's kind of like it's like a cliche at this point, but the responses will always be, Nebraska's only 2% public. There's no public left to get shot out, or, name a state, right? And I'm always like, listen, we're talking about whitetails here. And so when you think, like, take Iowa, for example, when you take Iowa and you go, okay, I don't know what percentage of public land Iowa is. It's not super high, but the public land that is in Iowa probably isn't tillable. So it's probably really good cover for Iowa. Yeah. And so even if only 2% of the land mass of Iowa is public, it could be the best ground around. It could be the best timber. It could be the best river bottoms. And there's like a pretty high likelihood it's going to tilt that way. And so when you look at this stuff, you go, okay, well, maybe this state isn't, like a typical Western state where half of it's public and I can go anywhere and there's BLM and National Forest and all this stuff. But some of these whitetail states that don't advertise like a ton of public land, the public land is really good for whitetails, or, theoretically it should be, because it's going to be the best cover. And I think people kind of get hung up on that, and they think, well, if there's only a little bit of public land here, or, patchwork there, it's probably not worth going. And it's like, man, I don't know. You got to think about what's the core area of a whitetail. And, when you look at Iowa, it's like, not only do you have pretty dense population in some of those places, you're not going to be dealing with winter kill, almost a guarantee. Yeah, they're dealing with some coyotes and maybe some bobcats in some parts of the state, but low hunter population compared to other states. So you start factoring all this stuff in and going like, man, even though I might only have a smaller amount of public land to work with, there should be a really good population of deer there. And I know you guys have seen this traveling. Like, I see that in places where I'm like, people will complain and be like, oh, the deer hunting sucks here. And I go there and I'm like, there's freaking deer everywhere. Like, this is like Oklahoma that you were just in. Every time I go to Oklahoma, I'm like, this place is just fun. Like, because I know I'm around a ton of deer, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You can see it whenever you just drive around. I was driving around a place the other day in Oklahoma scouting, and it was kind of neat because I was using this layer on X where you can see crop data and stuff like that, and there was like a bunch of wheat there last year, but this year there's only one 80-acre pocket that they kind of no-tilled in, but it's not doing great. But it looks like, I mean, tunnels through the fence, where, because I would assume that in that situation, it's a big creek bottom, right, with a decent amount of cover around. But deer have been depending on, 300 or 400 acres of wheat there for a couple years at least, and there's been a decent population buildup. Well, now they just all concentrated on this one tiny field because it's the only thing that got planted with wheat. And man, there's a lot of deer around, just like you're saying, and things like that. That's where like being on the ground is just kind of invaluable, because it can't map scout that. You can't figure that out from just looking at the map. But yeah, man, I think that people super underrate the amount of public land that there is. I'm from Texas, right? And that's also kind of cliche. Everybody knows Texas doesn't have much public land, but there's some. We hunt it, and it's not bad hunting. The thing you're going to deal with in these states that have low amounts of public land, if they are over the counter, low relative, right, is lack of age class, usually, because deer get shot. And, if you're willing to accept that and be happy to go shoot a 3-year-old somewhere, yeah, it's cool. And, Iowa's different because it's pretty tough to draw and fairly expensive to get into. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. But the people who say like, oh, there's not much public land, I feel like that's a very Western perspective. Like if you're from the East and, put that in air quotes, right? Pretty much anything east of the Rockies, or I guess east of the Plain States, you're kind of used to that, like, shoot, man, you start thinking about it. Texas is 2.6% huntable public land. And of that, you can hunt deer like 1.4 or less. So it's just, the percentages sound just, abysmal. They sound terrible. But you start looking at a state that's, the size of Poland, and then you realize, oh, that's still a decent amount of acreage, So there's some ground to hunt, and like you're saying, we don't have as good of crops, but a lot of the flat grounds in cattle production or hay production. So all the stuff that ended up in Corps Engineers or whatever is all kind of bottom lands, and voila, you got deer habitat.
Yeah. Well, a couple things there. So when you talk about, maybe not the best age class on public land, like that's a very common complaint, but it's also the reality that most of us, if we're traveling out of state and we want to go have a good hunt, you throw a dart on the map, man. If it lands near some woods or some cover, there's a buck that probably uses that all of us would be happy with. Absolutely. And so a lot of people plan their hunts around, I really want a 140 or a 150 plus or something. And that's kind of a scary thing to focus on. Instead, you should be looking at just like, where can I go to have a badass hunt? And I really would caution people. We're in a weird place with public land right now, because it's freaking busy, and it's busy across the spectrum, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you're hunting, but there's still great opportunities out there. But there's also a lot of loud voices that are bitching about it, about all of this pressure. And if you're interested in traveling out of state, you might visit a bunch of different sites that are dedicated to traveling to hunt, or these forums or whatever, and you're going to hear a ton of negative stuff. And but I almost think you should not use any of that stuff. And I know it's like, it's a dangerous blanket statement, but you don't know who you're getting advice from. Like, you don't know what their motivations are. You have no idea if they know how to hunt. And so you might have somebody telling you not to come there because all the deer died of EHD, or the rifle hunters shoot them all. This person might not have killed a buck in the last 20 years. They might just be a keyboard warrior, right?
Yeah.
And so I think really, and I'm curious if you guys do this, but when you go hunt a bunch of different states on public land and you're camping and you're doing your thing, you just realize how much BS is out there, and how what we think and we say we know and what we believe, when you go out there, you just realize, like, nope, it's totally different. There's quality to be had. There's action-packed hunts to be had. There's just fun, enjoyable hunting. And it's not easy. Like, it's not gonna be easy, but it's always worth it. And so you kind of got to close those browser windows, stop listening to those people, and just go, I would love to hunt Missouri, or I would love to hunt whatever. I'm just going to do it, and start really doing that map scouting that you're talking about, and the research for yourself, and just acknowledge that there's going to be enough deer there for you, and there's going to be deer that are going to make you happy right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you need to model yourself as the type of person who can be happy, because if you just have a mentality where you're just not very happy, you're not going to be happy with the hunt. You get what I'm saying? Like, it takes mentality to be a traveling public land hunter. You have to, you have to be able to appreciate what you're doing, appreciate the landscape you're in, and appreciate the animals, and like it. Not to be too hippie, right? But I am a little bit of a hippie, so like you need to know like how to be happy. You need to figure that out, and then you can be happy with the type of deer that you shoot, right? And I think for sure we run into that a ton. And I used to just be all over the hunting forums and stuff, just listening, trying to pick up on little things and taking notes and all that. And now I just realized that, man, it's an inverse bell curve. And there's going to be a whole bunch of people on each side. There's going to be guys these guys usually are the people you talk to in a camp or something like that. Oh yeah, man, there's been 3 170s killed here, like those guys. And there's the other guys like, oh man, it's terrible. There's hunters everywhere. And EHD is just, it's been killing us. And it's like, you know what, if you just go show up at, said state, on a piece of public ground, spend 3 days, you'll figure something out and probably find some deer.
Yep.
Might not be a 170, but you'll see something, which is kind of right in the middle of all that.
Yeah. And what's cool about it is, at least with whitetails now, and this is why I know people get mad when you encourage people to go hunt public land, but really we've just got good opportunities right now. And I'm not confident they're going to be here in the future as far as like over the counter tags and places you can just buy your tag online and go show up and hunt and have a great hunt. And so I'm like, take advantage of that now, because we don't know where that's going. But there's also the reality of doing this where it's like, and you kind of alluded to this, if you hunt at home and you got your lease or your grandma's farm or whatever, and you're, go to the same tree stands over and over, and you're like, man, I'd like to go saddle up and be mobile. Like find a state, find a situation that's going to allow you to do that. Or like you mentioned earlier, if you're kind of squirrely and you got a bunch of ADHD going on in your brain and you want to go try to find deer and stalk them, there's states that are going to sell you a tag where you can do that. Like there's opportunities to expand your worldview of whitetails. That's what's so cool about it. Like it's not just go, like the Iowa thing is a perfect example. Everybody says, I want to go to Iowa because I want to kill a big one. Man, I drew Iowa last year and I had more fun hunting there than anywhere because I saw so many deer. Like I knew I was going to go in and I could get a layer back from the other guys who were hunting this public that I was on, and I wasn't going to blank. And you know how it is. Like when you hunt a state like that, you see enough deer, one of them's going to be freaking awesome, or a couple of them are, and it's so fun to hunt that way and have that. And I've seen that in states, it's not just Iowa, right? Like some of these states where people just really don't know how good they have it. You can go and see a ton of deer and have an awesome hunt, and it's freaking over the counter, man. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you start planning and think about your hunts, you look at these states that everyone knows is amazing and hunt the fringes of those, man. If you want to go have a good hunt, you can do it anywhere. But if you're trying to find a place to start and you don't really know how to do that, like you zone in on whatever state. I hate to put a spotlight, but you find one of those states that everybody knows, great state to hunt. Oh yeah, man, it's awesome. Well, you know what? There's state boundaries right there, pretty close to that you can probably have a pretty good hunt on too. It's not super hard to figure out. And I've done some of that, and guess what? The quality of bucks on that side of that imaginary line are about the same as over here. There might be a little bit increased hunting pressure depending on what's going on or whatever, but there's so many arbitrary imaginary lines that we place on ourselves that animals don't give a hoot about. You can take this back to we've been talking a lot about this, like roads, man. And I know we're talking on a big scale, but dude, deer don't give a hoot about roads, not even major interstates, man. I mean, yeah, of course they're going to consider it when they cross one because there's a bunch of cars and stuff. But we were hunting somewhere this year and there were deer crossing the interstate every day. Just not like, hey, it's the rut, I'm going to do something weird. Just like how they lived, and you take that and then you apply it to White Rock that you find in Iowa, Missouri or whatever. Like they don't care at all. It does not matter one bit. And we think about like, oh, I don't know if I want to hunt next to that road, whatever. Tyler, what am I saying? Tyler killed in Iowa. That's how fast I talk sometimes, man. I just combine sentences into one word. Tyler killed in Iowa on a place that we mass scouted that was 80 yards from a road, on public ground. And it's just like, yeah, I probably wouldn't hunt right next to the parking area because that's kind of a forum thing to do, like, oh, I killed him right there. But deer don't care about this stuff that we make up. They just don't. They don't care. And it goes back to the rut schedule, all that stuff. We saw deer in Kansas also locked down on does, on November 5th, and there's not a specific, there might be in other states. And I'm not going to down anybody who has a ton more knowledge than me. Like, say, Bill Winke, for instance. I love Bill Winke. Bill Winke's so smart, and he's such a good deer hunter, such a nice guy. He believes in specific lockdown dates, right? And it very well could be that on the places he's hunted in Iowa. I haven't hunted those places, but I don't see that, hardly at all. I think that at any point in time in the month of November, you can have a buck who's wanting to hang out with his buddies. You can have a buck that's running around being crazy, zombie mode, chasing does. And you can have a buck that's hanging out with this girl, and he's going to make sure he is within 5 feet of her all day long, and that's what I've seen. So That's completely the other direction of what we were just talking about, man. I told you, scatterbrain. But yeah, there's kind of to bring it back out, like for people who are planning hunts and thinking about going places, don't let human boundaries affect your deer hunting, right? In every sense of the word boundary, except for property lines, because you probably don't want to cross on a private property unless you have permission.
Don't do that. I think, I find myself when I think about this stuff, I find myself having to, we kind of default to the negatives, right? Like we say, okay, there's going to be too many people, or, that interstate's right there, so I don't want to hunt by that. We go negative a lot. But the positive thing about whitetails is they're going to tell you where they are. They leave a lot of sign. And so, your example of, Tyler killing right by an interstate. I mean, I scouted a spot in Iowa. I didn't hunt it, but I scouted a spot right along the interstate where I'm positive you could have killed a big one 50 yards from that interstate. Like I found spots where I was like, holy shit, like they're cruising right along this. They're crossing it. I found places where they were crossing it. And it's like, you would look at that and go, that's probably not where I want to hunt, or there's not going to be deer there. Then you walk in and they tell you, like they let you know. And it's the same thing, like your anecdote about the parking lots. And, everybody, it was get 7 miles back in the backcountry. For whitetails, it was get a mile or two back. Now it's like, everybody's doing that so you can kill one right by the parking lot. And it's like, yeah, there's a little from column A, a little from column B, but the reality is they're just going to show you. And I know I've had times in my life where I felt like I had to get back so far, where you're like, they are pushed back a couple layers deep. And there's times where you're walking back there to those spots and you run across tons of sign right by the parking area. I mean, I've killed a couple bucks in different states where I could see my truck, like 2-minute drags back there, and you're on public land. You're like, this is stupid, but you just look and go, this is where they are. And so it's a matter, people when they're planning these hunts, or they're like, I'd like to go try that. You fall in love with these ideas of your e-scouting, and e-scouting's super important. Like I fully believe that, but it's like a foundation. And then you get there and you got to go, okay, well, I love this spot. I dropped a pin here. I love this spot. I dropped a pin here. Pay attention to what you see on the way in and the way out, and pay attention to whether you were right or wrong, because you get that stuff wrong all the time. But somewhere in that process, if you have that kind of rough plan, but you're open to freelancing it a little bit, you're going to run across that concentration of sign somewhere. Even if you're in the big woods, eventually you're going to run across something, even if it's just one community scrape or whatever that speaks to you, it's out there. And it's just, it's so freaking fun to show up where you don't know where that's going to be. And then when you find it and that place is just humming, it's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Something else that you talk about, the walk in and that kind of stuff and finding stuff on the way in, something else that people don't like to do that can really benefit you when it comes to like actually going in and hunting is guys are down with the walk in far thing nowadays, right? But a lot of times I feel that people don't want to walk in through junk, like just terrible places to go get to that stuff. Like it's kind of like the scenic thing almost, where it's like, well, I'll walk a mile in, but I kind of want to go, through this creek crossing and walk through some timber and get there. Whereas in Oklahoma, the best spot we found the other day, you had to walk through 3/4 of a mile of grazed to 2 inches, just nasty, just across the hay meadow, right, to get to this spot. And it's just not very scenic, right? It's not very enjoyable, especially when it's 35 and windy, to just walk out across there and get blasted. And I think that you have to decide what you want, right? If you want to go in and kill a deer, then you got to be willing to do that. If you want to have a pretty walk in, then you don't do that, But I think that's something else that kind of stems off of what you're talking about. It's like don't fall in love with a spot because the whole area looks great, man. You only need you just need a buck to be in one spot to kill him. Right. He needs to be 20 yards from you one time. That's all you need. Like, you don't have to have this place that's just beautiful or whatever that you walk into, right? Like hunting next to the interstate stuff, man, that drives me crazy. I only did it one time this year because I just couldn't handle that concept. And it's because that's not what I wanted out of the hunt. Yep. Right. It also probably helped that I didn't see a booner in there that day, but if I did, I probably would have hunted there a lot, Yep. So it makes a big difference. And still, even on stuff like that, you can learn on the way in and figure out, hey, this isn't where I need to be. Because you know what? On that same hunt, we went in, I already told you about putting that stalk on that deer that was a failed stalk, but realized you could glass from that position, and then realized how much the deer were still using that bald, nasty hay meadow early in the morning, right? There was like a grove of trees out there that I think they were soapberries. And in the summertime, their foliage is so thick that it blocks out the sun. Well, the winter, there was a ton of green grass growing up underneath there. And, sometimes once it gets to December, it's dirt and green grass. That's all they got to eat, and there's these little food pockets that you don't even realize are there, and it takes that observation stuff, that learning that you do on the fly out there to realize that stuff.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co, and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
We've been really conditioned to fall in love with the aesthetics of certain places. Mm-hmm. Turkey hunters do this all the time, right? Like if you public land turkey hunt a lot, that kind of dreamy pastured woods that, with the cornfield in the corner, like that kind of place that would be so awesome to run and gun on private land, that place will be worthless on public land for turkeys, and turkeys figure it out. And so when you think about whitetails, they just are where they are. And a lot of times it's not the nice places we want to hunt. I know a lot of states have, state planted food plots, or, they'll lease out some ground, and, it looks amazing, right? Like, it looks like the kind of place, if you showed up on a private chunk, you'd be like, I'm setting up on the edge of this. But when you get there on public, you just go, this is just a place everybody's going to be. And you start figuring out that what I like to look at and what I'd kind of like to sit and hunt in is probably not where these deer are going to be, because we're all kind of wired to do that. And you get these moments when you do these kind of hunts where you figure out that those deer, even though, like a prime example, where I've killed a bunch of bucks in South Dakota, there's ag mixed in there. It's a lot of walk-in area stuff. So it's working ranches. Looks amazing. And you can find good bucks on that stuff. But a lot of times I find those deer back in these meadows and back in these places on these benches where they're browsing. And I'm sure they're ending up on that ag at some point and starting there in the morning. But where they're killable are the places that just don't look as deery. But that's where they're at. And it's so consistent. And you kind of have to reframe your thought process. If you're planning on going on an out-of-state whitetail trip and you've only ever hunted, private land in your home state, permission-based, whatever, you sort of have to go, okay, this is going to be a different thing probably. Like, this is where the deer are going to be in that state I want to go to, and how they're going to use the land is going to be somewhat different probably than what I'm used to. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. The same thing with, trail cameras. If you take a bunch of trail cameras with you on a trip and you've got 5 or 6 days, like, that's probably not a great idea for most hunts, because you're working backwards on that, and you need to be in the moment more. And so you have to think like, okay, this trip that I'm planning, this is a different thing than what I do all year at home. And I think people, until you really expose yourself to that, it's kind of hard to understand and hard to get into that different mode, but it's pretty necessary.
Yeah. That's a thing that outdoor TV has sold somewhat of the, well, we're going to show up and put the trail camera out and see, and not to be rude to those guys or whatever, a lot of those guys are pioneers, but that just isn't very applicable for a 5 to 7 day out of state hunt. There are a few things. One thing that we do in that specific situation you're talking about, we use some mulch cell cams, right? And we'll find a piece of, maybe state planted ag stuff or whatever on some public ground, hang that camera on a obvious trail that it's going to be nighttime, but you can somewhat plan. If you're good at scouting, you can say, okay, that buck was there at 10 p.m. I know which direction of travel he is. Let's go back and find that sucker and kill him a half mile from the camera, right? And that's something I've seen. Another thing I've learned from you is I think, when we first started talking about stuff, probably, 2018, 2019, something like that, you're big on October and hunting deer then. And I think that when you start talking about going to public land and finding these places that look really good, you're like, man, every other guy's going to be in there. Well, that is true, but you can actually hunt at times when there's going to be a lot less people than others. Tyler planned his Iowa hunt in 2019, kind of on the front and back end of the rut vacation type hunts. You can think about the same thing. We go to South Dakota for October 1st archery opener and hardly ever see another person that's hunting whitetails, because there's if you hunt private ground in South Dakota, you can start in September, and then after that, a lot of people are trying to hunt muleys anyways, and then everybody else just kind of waits in the rut. You can go up there in October when there's hardly anybody around and sit on this, picturesque spot and shoot a deer, because who wants to hunt deer on October 4th? That's at least that's kind of the what it seems people have the opinion of. So I think that's a kind of a thing that you can also figure in if you're trying to hunt out of state, especially on the front end of that, push for pressure in November. October is a pretty cool spot, especially if you want to go try something new. You can still make it home or wherever your traditional rut hunting spot is. Go try October somewhere else, especially if you're kind of from the south. You can go further north a little bit, get some cooler weather, and see some pretty good deer movement.
Yeah. Well, my thing with October came from growing up in a state with a super early gun season, and just, never so many years of my life, I never relied on the rut at all because it wasn't an option. And so I just hunted when I could, which was, I hunted every chance I could. Let me put it this way, for years and years and years. And you just realize like, okay, these guys are telling me middle October sucks, but I'm going out here and I'm having fun hunts. Like, what's going on? There's a disconnect here. And then when you see there's trends in the hunting population and you see these things we just internalize so much. And I'm a contrarian. I'm like, I don't want to be there when everybody else is there. I would rather theoretically have harder hunting, quote unquote, in the middle of October and have fewer people to deal with than just show up during the rut. And I think a lot of people make a planning mistake around this. They go, I got to be in Nebraska on September 1 because I want a velvet buck. Well, yeah, you and 73,000 other guys are thinking the same thing. Or, you know, the rut is even more popular probably in most of these states. And you go, I got to be there on November 7th. That's the date. And listen, you can have amazing rut hunts on public land. You can, but you're saying I'm going to play this in a way where I hope the deer are out of their minds and they're running everywhere. But I also know there's going to be more pressure in the woods with me, more competition than any other point of the season, except maybe opening weekend. And then you've got all this space between there. And you go, listen, do I want to just try to work the deer, or do I want to have to heavily factor in the pressure? And for me, I'm like, I want to compete against the deer. They're a hell of a lot easier to work with than, you know, when the parking lots start filling up and people are everywhere. And this is a message people like, I think they don't believe it almost. Like, because we've heard it so much, but go spend some time doing this. And I say this, so a great way to plan your first hunt is pick a state like Oklahoma or some state that's going to be a target rich environment probably. And, but you know, you maybe aren't necessarily going there dreaming of 160s, right? You're like, I just want to go have a good hunt, maybe kill a couple does, maybe run into a decent buck, whatever, maybe a pig. Just go to have a fun hunt. Do it in a time where you're like, I'm not going to feel guilty because I'm missing a rut hunt, right? Like, I'm not going to feel guilty because I should be here or there or wherever, and go experience that. You know, like go spend that time, go camp for a few days and go hunt during those off times when you have lower expectations. You have less into it than maybe waiting that 3 or 4 or 5 years for the Iowa tag, and see what you can come up with, because you're going to have a hell of a lot of fun, I bet.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that Tyler and I talk about a lot is go hunt places that you have to find sign as opposed to interpret sign. Like, I can't imagine showing up to Iowa after waiting 5 years and just being like, what do I do? Because this isn't the truth, but it feels like there's a scrape and a rub almost every tree and a lot of that stuff. And you're like, oh, I'll just hunt right here, you know. But if you go to some of these states and you learn a little bit more about traveling and hunting and interpreting sign and doing that, you'll be way more prepared for when you do draw that good tag. You know, like if you have to go and figure out how to kill a deer in, say, North Dakota, then whenever you do draw Iowa, it's not your first time trying to figure out how to kill a deer on public ground, you know, and you've seen the difference in nighttime sign that's laid down and daytime sign that's laid down. And you've hunted, say, you know, if you're wanting to plan hunts and thinking about drawing a hunt like Iowa or something else, go hunt some hill country somewhere else, depending on what unit you're going to hunt, you know, but go practice in a state that's easier to draw or, you know, over the counter, that's similar habitat, and learn how the deer interact and act there. It's not going to be too different in Iowa or, you know, wherever you go. I hate to keep saying Iowa, but it's just what's relative to me, right? Yep. Like you'll know what to do there. You know, you'll know, oh, hey, they run the tops of the ridges whenever they're, you know, trying to smell does or whatever it might be, right? It's all about accumulating knowledge, and the way you do that is experience. I mean, dude, I would take 3 days in the woods over a year's worth of reading forum comments. You know what I mean? Like you can learn from both, but it's, you know, it's the difference in practice and playing. You know what I mean? It's just so much different.
Well, yeah. And you know, there's a good point to acknowledge there too, on so much of the hunting advice that's doled out from from everyone who does this is big bucks, big bucks, big bucks. Here's how you find big bucks. Here's how you kill big bucks. Here's how you set up. Here's how you call them. But when you start traveling and you go, I'm gonna burn 7 days of vacation. I'm gonna go hunt this state because I've always wanted to. What you realize is your first job, whether you kind of even acknowledge it or not, like it's intuitively, I have to find a deer concentration first. Like I have to figure out, I know I have a square mile or 5 square miles of land here. I got to find some pockets of deer, then start whittling it down. And we kind of go in and go, oh, that's night sign, or this is only where does live or whatever. But really, when you start finding where deer concentrate, you're going to have one that you want to shoot there. And it's like I know I said this earlier, but I'm always so surprised on, I'll put in so much e-scouting time and sometimes just nail it. Like sometimes I'm like, holy crap, I did a good job here. But a lot of times I show up and I go, this is not, it's not what I expected. And so you go, okay, well, I got to kind of go back to the drawing board. And I did this in Iowa last year when I drew. I had freaking waypoints. I had put in a stupid amount of time. I had been down there turkey hunt and look around, and I got down there opening day, and I was kind of like, I don't really have a plan. Like I have these spots, and so I hunted the first night, and after that night, I was like, I got to go find deer. Like even all this work I've done, like I still don't feel like I'm on a concentration, and so I sandbagged the morning, and I went and hiked around, and I found 3 spots where I was like, I'm on a concentration of deer and there's bucks here. And every one of them proved to be freaking awesome. But it was like kind of humbling, right? To be like, dude, you spent so many hours e-scouting and so many hours thinking about this and you still got it wrong and had to just get there on October 2nd or whenever it was and just walk around and go, okay, this trail's pounded. There's scrapes there. There's rubs there. There's obvious fresh sign. Now I have these 3 different little areas that I can start really, diving into, start observing, start figuring things out. And it's like, man, the whole process has to be there. And we kind of like the idea of just, getting some insider information or, finding this pinch point on e-scouting and it's going to be good enough. It's like, no, all that could be great. Doesn't mean anything till you get out there and you really ground truth this stuff.
Absolutely. There's a number of things that could be wrong. Like this last time, for instance, I went to Oklahoma. I've been to Oklahoma twice this, mid to late November and then once in December, and got up there, had to rework my spots the first time because they weren't as good as I'd hoped because the ag was different than I expected it to be. Found something out, learned something on about day 3 and had to come home on day 5. Right. And had some good encounters with some bucks, just didn't get to shoot one. And then I'm like, okay, ready to go the next time I go up there. I know exactly the place to be. Go in there, and there's 100 cows in the place all of a sudden. It's like, oh gosh, and you have to relearn all this stuff all over again. And being able to adapt and learn and change is super important. You cannot fall in love with a place, like a specific spot, because honestly, it's not that you love that and you think that it's a great place to kill a deer. It's that you're prideful and you think that you are smarter than the environment around you, or however you want to phrase that, right? And you got to put away the pride and just do what it takes to maybe find a deer, and have to be able to look yourself in the eye or in the mirror and say, you know what? I got to scratch that whole last week of information that I learned and start over. And that's the way it is. You just have to be able to accept that kind of stuff. And it's hard for me to do that. It really is. I have a conviction to be as humble as I can, but at the same time, it's so hard to make yourself humble, right? Other things make you humble. You are humbled. You do not humble yourself, right? So the more I hunt, I can see it happening a little bit. I'm not good at it yet, but being able to not waste days on a bad spot because you're telling yourself, oh, it's good. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Because, realistically, for guys, not a lot of guys can go to Kansas and spend 9 days like I did this year. I realize that, I'm blessed in that aspect. I'm just thankful for the opportunities, right? But, most guys take off Thursday and Friday and make a long weekend of it whenever they get to go on a hunt, and man, if you are in that boat, and still I feel this way on a 9-day hunt, I have a morning that I feel like is completely wasted and I didn't learn anything. I'm just like down in the dumps about it, because you're just, there's 12 hours of your life you'll never get back on a hunt that might be 72 hours left. And you're like, golly, I have to do the same thing over again tonight and try to put something together. And it just doesn't work out, and I think that it's huge. A huge thing for us to learn is that you need to just put any ego or whatever you have aside and just do what it takes to kill a deer. And it sounds so cliche, but it's not I'm going to work harder, be stronger, be faster, be a better shot, all that stuff. It's the, hey, I'm going to take what I'm given and do the best with it. You approach it just a different direction. And I think that's what helps kill deer,
Well, and on that note, I mean, one of the things I preach about all the time that I firmly believe in is give yourself options. And so if you're planning a hunt and you're like, I'm going here and I'm going to hunt this property, you better have a backup. Even if that property is 10,000 acres. I mean, I just, using Oklahoma as an example, the only time, the worst time of my life, as far as like this scenario, I went down, my buddy and I drove down there and, it was like 14 hours. I did a pile of research. I'm like, we are going to be covered in deer in this spot. It was different from the area that I had gone to previously. We showed up, camp. There were a lot of people there, but we had a lot of ground to work with. I couldn't find a freaking deer. I mean, I was like, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm setting up to observe. I had hours and hours and hours of e-scouting into it. And I literally couldn't see a deer. I finally saw a doe and 2 fawns the last morning, where my buddy and I the night before were like, we're not on anything. Like we're like not on anything, like no deer. And I was like, maybe we got to pull the plug on this and go call an audible. And we ended up doing that. And we kind of realized that the area we hunted was probably not a great choice for us as far as like our strong suits, right? Like it was more of it almost felt more like a Texas hunt would be to me. Like if I showed up in Texas, like I'd have to reframe how I think about a lot of stuff, because it's just such different habitat. And this was kind of like that. I'm like, we need to go north. We need to get closer to the kind of trees I'm used to. And we need to go just sort of reset. And my flaw in that trip planning was I became so cocky. I was like, this is it. We have thousands of acres to work with. There's going to be tons of deer here. We don't need a backup. And we needed a backup bad. And we ended up getting lucky and picking a spot where we went to and had a great hunt and saved the last couple of days of our hunt. But that was like a cardinal rule for mine, is like, don't go in with just a spot. Don't go in with just an idea that this is it. And when you plan these hunts, a lot of times we'll go, okay, well, there's a chunk of public on this side of the road and a chunk of public on that side of the road. So that's good enough. And I'm talking, maybe give yourself an entire quarter of a state. Like maybe, if you show up and it is not working, instead of just kind of like pushing a dead program, you might have to drive a couple hours to a new area and sort of reset. But like in the grand scheme of that kind of hunt and the investment you put in, pulling up, repacking your tent and your camping gear, whatever, and moving 3 hours down the road, it's not that big of a deal. And it might change the entire course of your hunt.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that I've learned as well, man. And I've learned it more from elk hunting than I have deer hunting, to tell you the truth. And you and I've talked about this before, but the things that you learn doing X hunt help you so much with a completely different type of hunt. It's crazy, right? And I won't go too far into that, but the driving you do and going to bed at midnight as opposed to getting your 8:30 like normally, those 3 hours you lose or 3.5 is so worth it sometimes, and you know what? We can all function on 4 hours of sleep one night, and grab an hour in the afternoon, like it works. You can do it. If it gives you an opportunity to hunt good deer or hunt a good spot, then it's worth doing. And when it comes to hunt planning, that's kind of a huge thing too. Like, it's good to be able to go find states that allow you to hunt the whole state, because then you have that option. One of the things that I actually dislike about Iowa is the zones.
Yep.
You have to stay within this certain unit. And it's pretty big, and you know that before you go into it, right? But like, I'm kind of a vagabond, right? Or whatever you want to call it. Like, I like to just hit the road sometimes and go see something new. And having that option is really nice. And if you do have that option, though, something I've found that really helps me is setting a deadline for that. So say I'm going to give myself 3 days here. If I am not on a good deer, or if I'm not on a good pattern or feel like something's going on, I'm going to pull the plug right then, and forcing yourself to do it. Right now, also it takes a little bit of I don't know what you would call it. It takes a little bit of gusto to tell yourself, nope, I'm going to live and die here because I've seen this one deer or whatever. Like, you have to have a certain constitution about you to be able to do that. Right. But it's good to have that, I guess, ticker in the back of your head. I work pretty good under pressure too, so it kind of helps me to have a ticker. I noticed in Kansas that when I had 9 days, I killed on the 8th day. And maybe if I only had 4 days, I would have killed on the 3rd day. You know what I mean? So I think it's super helpful to scout that stuff, e-scout, and then also think that I'm gonna not only plan for a plan B, but gonna make sure plan B looks different than what plan A is, because just like you're saying, certain people have strong suits. If you're not used to hunting big timber, heavy cover with a ton of acorns for northern folks, right?
For us Yankees.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it could be tough because the deer only have to walk 50 yards to eat and 100 yards to drink. So if you're not used to that, but you want to go try it, find you something else that's near wheat fields and cottonwoods or whatever it might be. That's your backup, not a backup that's similar habitat, but just a different spot. Because really, that's no difference in bouncing across the street, right? Because it's the same thing pretty much.
Yeah. And something on, what you said about, giving yourself a deadline and being like, if 3 days and this sucks, I'm out. One of the things I think that people make a huge mistake on with hunt planning is going with too many people or the wrong people. Because that situation where if you get there and you're like, you personally, you're like, I don't like this and I'm ready to go. If you have somebody, the more people you have in camp, the more people you have invested in that hunt, the harder it is to just pull up stakes and move. And I know that people don't like to hear this because we like to travel with our buddies, but man, if you can keep it small or go solo, you will probably have a way better hunt. And I know it costs a little bit more, and I know there's a different, safety aspect and stuff like that. But when you're operating on your own schedule, or you've got like one trusted buddy who's like going to do the work and is kind of on the same wavelength as you, it's so much easier to have a good hunt, to enjoy yourself, to make better decisions. And the more you get random people involved, or the more you get people who they have different objectives, different work ethics, it sucks, man.
Yeah, it does. And then a lot of times when you have those people involved that maybe hunt differently or have a different work ethic or yada, yada, you end up hunting close to each other because you have one or two vehicles. And then it can cause a little split in the friendship or whatever you want to call it, because you just have different expectations of what the other's going to do. Whereas we did this in South Dakota, right? No lost friendships at all, but we had 6 guys in camp, 3 vehicles. So there was always a pair going out. And some of those guys were running camera and this and that, but a lot of us ended up hunting near each other because of drop-offs in that situation. One guy has astigmatism, can't see in the evening at all. Like he is going to usually get down out of his tree before most of us would. And no fault of his own. I don't even think he can tell like when actual, into shooting light is, you know what I mean? And so we had to learn to kind of work around that. And then, just different hunting styles and that sort of thing. One of the things that I find invaluable is just having your own vehicle, just being able to be your man on the island, Darrell Rivas style, just out there doing your thing, making your own decisions, living and dying by what you do. That way you don't have anybody to be upset with except yourself. You can have 6 guys in camp, but having 6 vehicles and everybody able to go one direction, it's not very green friendly, right? I mean, I guess you could drive Teslas and make it work and be fine, but but just being able to go and make your own choices, I think that's a huge thing, man. And that's why Tyler and I love hunting together so much now. It's because we've definitely changed somewhat to mold ourselves to one another as far as hunting partners go, but we work so well together now because it's that situation where we've hunted together enough that instead of getting each other's way, we can't go to different states without calling each other twice a day to convey information just because we trust each other so much to make good choices. And we just play shoot holes in the boat every time we talk, just like what can be wrong with this spot? What can we do different? What can be done different? And when you find that person you can trust that much, man, you talk about being able to kill some deer, because it's like you have the cumulative experiences of two experienced hunters working together at once without pride getting in the way, without another guy who thinks similarly to you can circumvent your pride way faster than you ever thought. Like, oh man, I figured the spot out, it's good. And he's like, are you sure you can hunt that on southwest wind? And you're like, oh, what a dummy. I'm so stupid, like having that person is pretty huge for my success, at least. I know some people, the whole lone wolf thing's the way to go, because they like that, and that's fine too. But I really do find value in that one good solid hunting partner,
Yeah, it's a difference maker. And, something you kind of alluded to this, something that happens when you go do a trip like this is you find out, like how greedy you are for whitetails, how greedy your buddies are. And it can change the dynamic if you're not working together. And it's a little dance, man. But I remember there were 4 of us. We hunted South Dakota, 2017, maybe somewhere around there. And we got there, did some scouting. And the night before the season opened, a couple of us were driving back to camp, and we saw 2 good bucks on public land right off the road going through this one field. And it was like pin drop quiet in the truck because everybody wanted to go after them. Like everybody's like, I want to hunt that deer tomorrow or those deer tomorrow. Yeah. And finally my buddy Eric said something like, well, I would go in and like he broke the ice, right? And we're like, well, okay, well, I guess go in there. And he went in there and killed that buck. But right away, when we saw him, everybody thought the same thing. Like, I want to kill that 10-pointer. Like everybody. And like now you're like, shit, like, how do I play this? And, it worked out for him. But later in that hunt, one of the guys there, so we had one chunk of public that had a nice bean field you could hunt, and the deer were using it. It was good. And so, but it's an evening thing, right? Like if you walk in there in the morning, it's no bueno. And so we were kind of hunting different stuff in the mornings and then trying to kind of gang hunt this particular property in the evening. Well, I went out like 3rd, 4th morning of the hunt, shot a buck. And when I went out to look for my arrow, I see this dude driving back from that ranch. And I'm like, man, he went over there and tried to spot and stalk one in there. Didn't tell anybody. You know what I mean? And so we were all kind of playing by the same rules. Like, let's save that because of how good it's going to be. This guy just thought he was going to get away with it. And he would have if I hadn't just randomly shot a buck and been able to see the road from where I got out. And that shit happens, man. And, it's like deer, that non-resident license price and that trip away from home and big deer, they do stuff to us that's not good. And you really learn if you do this enough, like who you can trust and who you can't and who you're really going to have a good hunt with. And I think that's part of the reason why some people do function better on a solo trip. Like, it's like, that's on you, man. Like you find a big one, go after it. You make these decisions and you kind of got to learn about yourself and your buddies that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for us, there's a lot of things that help us to navigate around that. One of the big ones though, is that, just to be frank, we're trying to do this somewhat as a business, right? And not even somewhat, we're trying to build a lifestyle and build a business around something we love doing. And it's micro communism, as much as it pains me to say it, right? But it's like, if Tyler kills a deer, it's great for me too, you know, like we're just all trying to have success. And it's not just because of the business, right? But you just want them to succeed too. It helps a bunch, right? I can imagine being one of these guys that it's like, hey, I'm thinking about drawing Iowa this year on the forum, you know, it's like, anybody, who else is going to draw this? You know, let's team up and go. And it's like, you know, that's very nice of you, but dude, like, it's putting a lot of trust in somebody you don't know very good, you know? And like, once you build a hardcore friendship with somebody, it's like, yeah, dude, you go kill that buck. Let's go pack that thing out and take some pictures together, you know? And I think that it's definitely not a keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. It's definitely only keep your friends real close when it comes to going on a hunt like this, for me, at least, right? Like, you just want to, if you're going to do this with somebody, you want to do it with somebody that you care enough about that it would be cool to see them kill a big deer too.
Yeah, big time.
And then it all boils back to just setting your pride aside, man. It's so hard for every human to do this. So then you take a bunch of guys who fancy themselves as alphas who like to kill stuff, you know, and like, it's real hard to put pride aside, you know? And I truly believe that the thing that will help you do that over about near anything that, you know, humans can at least do is that you have to have compassion and care about the people you're with. Otherwise, you're going to be making prideful decisions. You're going to be making selfish decisions. And it's pretty hard to get around.
Big time, man. I know you got a hard out here, so we got to wrap this sucker up. Casey, where can everybody find the videos, the podcast, all that stuff?
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about that stuff. So the Element YouTube channel, search The Element Hunting or just public land hunting. We'll pop up pretty quick, I think. But actually, Tyler and I's Kansas bucks just released in the past couple weeks, so if I can, I'd love to tell y'all to go check out those hunts because they were really fun and mean a lot to him and I both. I killed the biggest public land deer that either of us have shot, and then 2 days later, Tyler blew it out of the water with his. So yep. we were so blessed this year, man, and it was really, really cool. So I'd appreciate that. And then of course, our socials are at The Element Wild because if you just search The Element on social, you'll come with a Skater brand or something like that. Yep. Yeah, that's what we got going on. So, you know, thanks for the opportunity for that. And the podcast is The Element Podcast. So, search all that stuff on all the platforms that you know of, and we'll pop up.
Awesome. But, thanks, brother. I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, dude. I hope you are excited. Are you done killing pheasants, or you still got pheasants going right now?
Pretty much done, man. But, you know, there's still a few states that are open, so there's still a chance. It was a good year. All right. It was a good year.
Good deal, man. So. That's awesome. We still have a few more deer to kill, hopefully. So we'll wrap it out strong, man. So thanks for the opportunity, Tony. It's real good talking to you, dude.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. That's it for this week, folks. Be sure to tune in next week if you want some more whitetail-y goodness. This has been Wired to Hunt, and I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson. As always, thank you so much for listening. And if you're looking for more whitetail content, head on over to themeateater.com/wired, and you'll see a pile of new articles by Mark, myself, and a bunch of whitetail addicts. Head on over to our YouTube channel, check out our how-to videos that we put up every week. Or if you're feeling sad and you're missing the rut, head on over to Meat Eater's YouTube channel and check out our 1 Week in November series that we dropped all of November and December.